What's up YouTube, and welcome to the latest episode of The Layup.Line. If you missed my last video, it was an update to my power rankings. I drop one at the start of the month and then I give an update somewhere around the middle of the month, so check that out if you haven't seen it. Also, if you're new to this channel, you should subscribe. I post NBA related content at least twice a week, so if you're a fan of the NBA, this is definitely the place for you. You can also find me on most social media platforms if you'd like to interact with me there. You can get previews about upcoming videos and catch me live tweeting most of the games I'm watching. As far as today's video, we're going to be talking about just how tremendous of an offensive season this has been.
You know what time it is? It's about to be that time.
AP, they said I gotta come off the bench.
Sensations, thinking they know the game of basketball, they would then have to admit that they don't know basketball.
How many times have you heard someone complain about the modern NBA and say something like this?
Defense isn't really an emphasis anymore in this league. So I think you're seeing that all around the league with these high scores. We know what the emphasis is. So.
Essentially, it's been a narrative for a while now that modern defense has gotten worse. Some analysts will take it as far as saying that no one plays defense in the league at all anymore, and this argument usually comes hand in hand with some argument against how much teams are shooting threes. We hear this narrative so often during the course of NBA games, from in-game analysts and broadcast, and then continued out in virtual discussion boards. I think this is partially due to a generation gap between younger and older fans, but nonetheless, I wanted to take a look at both sides of the argument and chart the development of three-point shooting and offensive increases, because this season, teams are shooting with record-breaking percentages. I've done similar videos like this in the past, but I once again hit Basketball Reference to map out 20 years of league shooting percentages. I noted the average ranked team for number of shooting metrics compared to averages from this year. Now, this season, NBA teams on average, their effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage are 5 and 3% higher than my 20-year sample. Strangely, the average three-point shooting percentage has remained around 35 to 36%, where it still sits today, but teams went from taking an average of 13 a game to 35 attempts this season. Similarly, the average three-point attempt rate has shot up from as low as 16% to 40% this season on average. Also worth noting here that there has been an increase in pace from the early 2000s. At the recording of this video, the Indiana Pacers are currently 15th in offensive rating at 112, which is well above the 106 offensive rating that I get as the average over this 20-year sample. Defensive metrics are pretty noisy, so I didn't keep track of those. They're often very context dependent and generally a poor way to measure who the good defenders are, but just looking at the average defensive rating, that has also dropped compared to my sample. For just talking raw statistics and a number of advanced metrics, you could easily make the argument that defense is less important. Even just using the eye test of how the game is called, referees are often giving the benefit of the doubt to the offensive players. The issue is with all of these arguments that they ignore the context of the rule changes and stylistic differences that have morphed the way that defense is played. For example, a common complaint about terrible modern defense is the critique around poor one-on-one defenders. This is commonly what we think of when we consider someone a poor defender, is that they're not good at keeping their man in front. In the 2000s, the NBA outlawed illegal defense rules that forced defenders to either fully commit to a double team or remain near an offensive player. While the illegal defense rule was in place, it made sense to analyze every player's individual defensive ability because you couldn't provide help the way that you can now. Imagine that you're up against the 90s Bulls and they have Dennis Rodman just sitting out at the three-point line. His defender can't come help whoever Jordan is isoing against because they'll either get called for illegal defense or you'll have Rodman backdoor for an easy read to the basket. A 2017 report from the New York Times' Mark Stein cites second spectrum data showing a near 11% increase in the zone defense usage. Even when teams aren't playing in zone, you might confuse their formations for zone because they're helping out and rotating now more than ever. While I guess you can describe the defense as bad, I just consider it different. The emphasis on what you're defending has changed. Instead of defending individual offensive players, coaches and players have focused on guarding areas of the court that they know that the offense wants to get to. Pick and roll is also a lot more common than ever because screen setting is so important. It's a skill that teams are using to generate space, and that space that they're using to get to the rim, pull up from three, or even get to their spot in the mid-range. The reason screens are so effective is because when a team throws one at you, it forces the defense into decision making. Coaches will usually preach a particular system of how they want screens handled in general, or depending on the personnel, but there are many layers to a defensive possession, and there are many instances of surface level analyzation of where the breakdowns are. I also have an issue with people breaking down defensive clips without considering how the coach is actually telling these players to handle these looks. Last year's Milwaukee Bucks posted all-time defensive numbers by selling out on the perimeter and even helping one pass away in order to prioritize paint defense. For the Bucks, a poor defensive possession involves rotating from the wrong side, or soft point of attack defense, or just generally being late on rotations. Last year's Lakers were also a top defensive team, but with a lot of stylistic differences, so I think it's an oversimplification to examine defense with one scheme in mind or traditional ideas of how it's played, because defense has become so complicated, and it's so important to scheme because offenses have gotten so good and creative. Now for me, this starts with looking at what the scheme is that the defense is running. Are the players actually executing that scheme, and where the breakdowns are coming from? For example, we can't always just look at a defensive possession and put the blame on the guy at the point of attack. If he was asked to funnel the offense into a specific direction and he does that, but his help comes late, either the scheme or the guys rotating are what's bad here. Ideally, if you can just stop all offense at the point of attack, well, you're just the best defensive team ever, but that's not realistic given how good today's offenses are. More than any time in NBA history, defense is played as a team, and it's no longer as impressive to have one wing stopper or paint defender who erases the team's mistakes. It's about rotations and communication and effort and IQ. It's a reminder that you're only as good as your worst defender, because the offenses have become so good and offensive skill is at an all-time high in league history, so regardless of how good of an individual defender you are, you won't get consistent stops against today's freakish offensive players. So maybe today's defenses are worse in a traditional sense, but they also are a lot more complex, and we should spend more time refining the way we talk about the other side of the ball. But those were just my opinions. Leave a like if you learned something new or if you like what I do. This took some work to track these stats on B-Ball Reference, so I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Comment down below and let me know what you think of modern NBA defenses and who your least favorite defender is to watch. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.
Like, we played defense. No, y'all fucking didn't. You just hacked motherfuckers y'all couldn't stop.
The shit out of him, yeah.
That's all you did. You hacked motherfuckers you couldn't stop. You couldn't stop Jordan, so you just clotheslined the motherfucker. That's all you did.